Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is August 1st. Happy August. Ooh, I forgot that I could have included that as a line in our morning show is live post on dailykos.com, the written side of the Daily Kos Radio Empire. We're ready to go with another show, regardless of the fact that it's August and everyone would like to take the month off and go home. Of course, reminder that I will be, in fact, off during the week of, I guess, the 15th. I guess it's Monday, the 15th, through Friday. We'll have to figure out exactly what we can put together for programming there, but it may well be August doldrums time. It might be time for reruns and for me to relax, recharge, and head on up to Niagara Falls. I can recharge my hydroelectric. Use hydroelectric to recharge my batteries. Greg Dworkin is back on board with us after his recharging period, and when it gets around to Wednesday, I think we'll be able to bring Joan McCarter back in. Some things happened last week, the week before, the parties got together, some news was made over the weekend. I don't know if you saw any of this stuff. Kaiser Khan has turned into, according to the Republican operatives who desperately want to be rid of him as a problem, a Muslim Brotherhood operative who is simultaneously tricked by Hillary Clinton into denouncing Donald Trump and also was secretly planted here by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is generally speaking based in Egypt, though I'm sure they have affiliates everywhere, whereas Kaiser Khan immigrated from the United Arab Emirates. Whatever. Anyway, Trump has spent the weekend doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on his attacks on the Kaiser Khan family. Lots and lots of Republicans denouncing the vicious attacks and yet backing him for president because, by God, something, I don't know, tax cuts for the wealthy, maybe that's it. Other developments over the weekend that I guess don't really matter a great deal. I don't even know where do you plug in to this whole thing. Naked pictures of the Republican nominee's wife. Not really sure how to integrate that into the story. We'll just say that they're out there and that the New York Post is publishing them. I don't know if, I don't know what to make of this. It's not supposed to matter, so I guess, okay, whatever. And also, I think it was pretty obvious that something like that was probably out there anyway. She's got no problems posting for racy photos as Trump's wife, so I guess it shouldn't surprise us. And of course, the other day we were reading the story of Meredith McIver, who may have nothing whatsoever to do with any of this in any way, shape, or form, but we were kind of curious about why she was thanking the owner of the Crazy Horse strip club in Paris for things, but that seems to have been, I would guess, for an involvement in her life some 10 years or so before Melania's pictures. Anyway, all very odd and strange, and of course all the things that you wouldn't normally want to see happening to, well, if you're a Republican candidate. But he's a different kind of candidate. Roger Stone is back in the picture. He's the one chiefly behind the accusations that Kaiser Khan is some sort of Muslim Brotherhood operative / mole. Roger Stone, of course, interesting time for him to come back on board with things. He's rather a well-known major league perv himself. He may have been the source of those pictures, but apparently they were published in a Paris magazine in 1995, 1996. And, well, hey, it's a new kind of a look for the White House, I guess. We always figured things would be different in a Donald Trump White House. So, hey, catch up with the New York Post. I'm sure they'll be glad to have your $1.25 or whatever it costs these days to get a hold of one of those papers. And now on to the news regarding things like, I don't know, policy or taxes or various other things that have to do with national politics. Let's see. Oh, yes, one of the big developments over the weekend, of course, was Trump's insistence that he understood sacrifice and that he himself had sacrificed, much like the Khan family did. Of course, we couldn't find any evidence of that, really. Let's see. Trump supporters have offered all sorts of explanations. Greg has a nice raft of stories on that one. That he sacrificed. I guess the line is that he sacrificed his marriages, but that's one of those things you're not supposed to sacrifice. That's a sort of a misreading of your evangelical base there. But of course, they forgive everything, so I suppose you can get away with almost anything there. Trump's kids, of course, conducted animal sacrifices on African quote-unquote safaris, where they drive you up to an animal and you shoot it and then you pose with it. That's actually, to tell the truth, I mean, if you went by my Twitter feed, the most explosive developments of the weekend were Trump saying that he had sacrificed, his sons being pictured making animal sacrifices, and then that shot of Trump sitting, once again, trying to put on that pouty, I guess what that's supposed to be, sort of seductive look, where he scowls and looks at the camera from underneath his bushy eyebrows and pouts. But the shot I'm talking about now is once again taken on a picture of one of those gilded throne chairs, but this time in front of a wall that appears to be decorated entirely in gold. I'm not really sure exactly what you would call this thing. He's got a shiny pink tie. He's doing like a high school yearbook kind of a pose, elbow on the knee. It's very goofy looking. And all I had done was commented that by saying, yes, seriously, I want you to press the shutter button, take this photo, please record this image, is such evidence, clear evidence of an impaired judgment all by itself. You don't even need to get to the rest of his record. And I guess everybody found that one extraordinarily entertaining. It is a bizarre photo. So it's a big weekend for unexpectedly bizarre photos from the Trump folks, campaign or otherwise. I have any number of stories that could make for a full day's analysis ready and standing by, but of course we also have a very long list of items here from Greg. We'll go over them. We'll pour over them one by one. We'll take a look at, I guess, how the polling is doing now that the two conventions are over. It strikes me that the conventions were actually pretty early this year. I can't recall exactly when the 2012 conventions were, nor do I feel like looking it up. But I do remember the last couple of conventions prior were much later, it seemed like, August and even into September, when the Republicans were the incumbent party, as we learned from Greg a few weeks ago, and went last in their conventions. Weren't they trying their level best almost to line up with 9/11 at one point? They were well into the first couple days of September with their convention. This is an awful long time, it feels like, a long haul between close of conventions and Election Day. And I wish there wasn't quite so much time. But we'll check in on how the polls are doing, and I'm sure Greg is keeping a close eye on the markets and who's got what chance of winning. I've seen Nate Silver with that storyline over the past couple of weeks. When last we heard about that storyline from him, there was the line that was catching everybody's eye, which was, if the election were held today, Trump would win. That was immediately post-convention for the Republicans, pre-convention for the Democrats. I doubt very much whether that still holds. And we'll see what the impact has been over the weekend and early polls post-Democratic convention as well. I missed it. I felt like Friday, it was such a crescendo. I mean, that's the way the show is supposed to run, the conventions, that is, and building towards bigger and bigger and more exciting and more accomplished speakers. And I really felt like Friday, as I said in the post, I was like, well, are we going to get Kennedy and and Roosevelt on Friday night, and I don't know what, George Washington will speak on Saturday to cap it all off. But it ended with Hillary Clinton, as it happens, and we'll see what America thought of her speeches and how she wrapped up. But again, most of the chatter has been, when are Republicans going to disavow Trump? And the answer is never, so we might as well get used to it, I suppose. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good morning. I'm great.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, great, I suppose.
It was a good thing.
Yeah.
Spent some time in Maine, and that was always fun. We always enjoy going up to Acadia National Park, which is its 100th year anniversary this year. Wow. And it was great. It was wonderful.
Okay. You haven't been going there that long, then?
Oh, about 20 years.
Okay, so a good chunk of the 100.
Right. And so I was away. And while I was away, it was interesting. The hotel that I was staying at is an old rustic hotel, and it doesn't have TVs in every room. And it has a TV room downstairs.
Yes, okay.
That guests can share and use.
All right.
And on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the convention, it was baseball.
Okay.
So the way to watch the convention was the YouTube DNC stream.
Yes, all right.
Which was iffy because the internet was spotty. So I got to hear a lot of it. And certainly the highlight of, I guess it was Thursday, because we were watching as a group downstairs. Thursday, people did want to see Hillary. So we got to see Reverend Barber. Yeah. And we got to see the Cons. Right. And then we got to see Hillary as a group watching TV, which was kind of interesting. One couple that was down there with us was from Dallas, as they describe it. Their house is the Blue Area in Texas. And a couple from Los Angeles, another couple from the Midwest, and then us from Connecticut. And it was a pretty amazing speech by Clinton in terms of, first woman and all of that actually mattered. It keeps getting blown over and because Trump does Trump stuff. Yeah. But it's still an amazingly important thing. Nonetheless, there are a lot of reactions to the convention, which I think by all accounts was much better handled than the mess that was the Republican convention the week before. So yes, there are some polls out now starting to dribble in. And right now, in the overall generic where you at, the Times has their own graph. They have Hillary at 44 and Trump at 41. The Huffington Post has it as 47-43, 4-point lead. Real Clear Politics, which does not include all polls, has Clinton with a 2.2 lead. So what kind of bounce is she getting? Actually, a fairly decent one from what it looks like. The last couple of polls out that are post-convention completely are Raba Research, which has Clinton up 15 at this point. That's a 10-point improvement. Public Policy Polling, which has a 5-point Clinton lead, but they didn't really have one just prior to the convention, so it's hard to measure bounce there. Morning Consult, which has Clinton +3 after having Trump, I think, something like +2 prior. And CBS is interesting because it was tied prior to the Republican convention. It was tied after the Republican convention. And now with leaners, it's Clinton +6. That's 47-41. So we've seen no bounce, really, maybe a 3-point change in the very weird LA Times USC tracking poll. But you can't even look at that till the end of the week because it's a 7-day window there. So you have to wait for all of the Republican convention to drop off. Plus, the way they weight different constituents who answer the poll, it's a asking, a resurveying of the same people. They give more weight to regular voters, which is to say older voters. So it's going to be a GOP House effect. It was as high as Trump +7. Now it's Trump +4. So we'll have to see what that looks like at the end of the week. What we're expecting today is last week CNN had a poll out on Monday. I expect CNN to have a poll out this Monday. And YouGov, The Economist, should be out this afternoon as well. So there should be more media polls today. But right now, Clinton has anywhere between a 3-4 point lead, and the bounce looks to be around 7 points. And that's significant in the sense that, yeah, it's a bounce and it's going to come down. But if at the end of the conventions she winds up leading even a point or two more than before the conventions, plus there's 100 days left, slightly less, I guess it's 99 now, days to the actual election. And traditional political science says that 100 days is when the polls start to become accurate. It looks like a fairly solid lead. This is the time of year where a 4-point lead is highly significant and difficult to change. In fact, the CBS poll notes that about 90% of Trump voters and 90% of Clinton voters won't change their mind. And that's what happens after the conventions. Next thing is the September debates, and already among the many other things, I heard some of your introduction about some of the things that had happened. This has been a very bad week for Trump, and an especially bad weekend with the Wrath of Khan story. And the whole thing is that now he's trying to weasel out of the debates.
So it seems. I mean, I guess everybody figured he would try and find some way of, at a minimum.
Right. His claim is, football is on. Football's always on.
Yeah.
You know, when Romney and Obama debated, I think the first debate was Obama's wedding anniversary. It didn't matter. You just do it. Except if you're Trump, in which case you blame it on somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the football. And that's another problem. I mean, I guess really the NFL is on every day of the week at this point.
Right. There's two different ways of approaching this, I think. One is to say we're doing it and we're not negotiating. Or, you want a different debate? Fine, we'll debate every single day between now and the election. Are you up for it? We're up for it. Right now,
preseason, no problem. They're not on nearly as often. Yeah, I guess any excuse that he can get a hold of. I did offer the fig leaf or compromise. We'll schedule them opposite the USFL games instead of the NFL games. But we can't do that anymore because
but what if there's a high school game going on? I mean,
true. Friday night, Friday, can't have Fridays.
So the line, I think the speeches of the convention that hit me more than any other. Sure, Michelle Obama was incredible, and sure, Biden was Biden, and sure, Obama was incredibly terrific, and Bill did his job, Hillary did her job. The two speeches that struck me the most were the Khans and, as I said, Reverend Barber, an all-inclusive moral discussion of voting and why it matters. But the line of the convention, the one that will be discussed from now until November, is actually a Hillary Clinton line, not all the other powerful speakers who are actually much better speakers than her. The line of the convention was, a man you can bait with a tweet is not a man you can trust with nuclear weapons.
True. Yes.
And what did they do? They baited him with that, and every single day he is proving that she's right.
Yeah, he can't take it. I think the thing that struck me midweek was, wow, he's really going to have to threaten to, I said blow up the moon in order to get the news cycle back. But he did the next best thing. Right.
Remember when he was getting a little outrageous on Twitter, Hillary's campaign said, delete your account, and that was kind of cute. But now what happens is every time he tries to say something on Twitter, and Twitter is a major, major communication thing for him. Yes. And Ron Fournier is doing it this morning. Every time he has an outrageous tweet, you tweet back with a quote, and the quote is, a man you can bait with a tweet is not a man we can trust with nuclear weapons. And I've seen people all over my Twitter feed doing this. And that's going to be the answer to every single thing that Trump tweets. Oh, I didn't say that about Crimea. A man you can bait with a tweet is not a man we can trust with nuclear weapons. Well, what about the Khans and radical Islam? A man you can bait with a tweet is not a man we can trust with nuclear weapons. You've defanged him in regard to using that as a weapon.
Well, very good.
It's brilliant.
So Ron Fournier is tweeting that to him?
Yes.
Very interesting. I can't tell. I'm blocked.
Yes. Well, it says that. In fact, it was several times. I'll tell you two Ron Fournier tweets this morning. Watching the Khans on Morning Joe, because they were on again this morning. Remember, this is a one-day story that because of Trump's actions, he's making it into a week-long story.
Yeah.
Watching the Khans on Morning Joe this morning, people who demonize people like this are not worthy of their son's sacrifice. Okay? And then Trump tweets This story is not about Mr. Khan, who was all over the place doing interviews, but rather, and this is in capitals, radical Islamic terrorism. And the U.S. Get smart. And Ron Fournier tweets that with the quote, "A man you can bait with a tweet is not a man we can trust with nuclear weapons." And so just over and over and over, he's not the only one doing it. It's an amazing sort of turn of events that one would normally not have expected to happen, but it did.
Yeah, all right, I'll follow along with that. I mean, not Ron Fournier, because I can't. As it turns out, I wasn't following him to begin with, but I used to see his tweets as people would retweet him, and I'd say, oh, I wonder what he's up to, and I'd click on it and say, oh, that's awful. But now I can no longer see that it's awful. So that's the big change for me this weekend. Not sure how that happened. But
anyway, so other things happening there with the Khan story.
Yeah.
Is that Trump surrogates are now attacking them as being Muslim Brotherhood infiltrators.
Right.
Anna Navarro tweets, Trump supporters, Trump sacrificed his marriages. Did Jeb serve? Mr. Khan is a Muslim Brotherhood agent. And Anna Navarro says, not making this crap up. This is actually what's happening this morning.
Yeah. I mean, they really were scrambling for things. The first, they also were attacking Mrs. Khan because she wasn't able really to say anything on stage. I mean, she's pretty
right, and she wrote an editorial in the Washington Post about how she was just overcome with grief, and for other medical reasons, including her blood pressure, she really couldn't deal with this well.
Mr. Khan was barely able to speak, really. I mean, he braved it out, and he did a great job, but you could tell.
That was not a written speech.
Right.
He just said everything.
He just had to keep, pausing to gather himself.
Right. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, part of the speech, of course, was Mr. Khan pulling out his pocket constitution and asking if Trump had ever read this.
Yes.
I did see AP that. Reports that on Amazon, they're sold out now of pocket constitutions. It's now become a bestseller.
Interesting. I mean, it's been a thing for quite a while.
Well, that's why he has one. But he always carries one. He's had it with him for years and years and years. And by the way, one of the other things Mr. Khan does as a regular thing ever since his son died was go to funerals at Arlington.
Yeah.
Honor his son. I mean, this is not some guy actor, what do they call him? The
crisis actor.
A crisis actor, right? So he's a really kind of hard target. Of course, both vets and a lot of Republican commentators are all over Trump for this. So this is going to be a big lose for him.
Okay.
He's doubling down on it. Why is that? My theory is that he really needs his brown shirt base, and this is a way to solidify them. Because if they start to slip away, he'll be at 20 instead of 38.
Yeah, I guess so. It is interesting. I mean, he's very intent on continuing to push on this, and I don't even know if I can put my finger on what it is that he identifies as so extraordinarily valuable about the Khan story. Like, what is he trying to recapture here?
Well, they've insulted him, so he cannot let that stand.
I guess that's all. I mean, I can't, because I'm looking at it traditionally, like looking for a strategic advantage in continuing, and I can't find it, and it's just, I guess it's just personal.
Right. So, New York Times, who will be president? They have about a 70% chance of winning the presidency. You mentioned Nate. We'll get to that. How other forecasts look, the Times is 70%. 538 is 51%. Very, very bearish one, which, according to them, this is their polls only. They also have a polls plus, which is more in the 60s. Their polls only is very heavily weighted to the most recent polls, they say.
Okay.
I sort of only half believe them. I think what they do is they weighted toward Quinnipiac polls, give them 10 points, for every other poll that's 1 point. But we'll see. If that's true, and it's weighted to most recent polls over the next 3 or 4 days, you should see that prediction rise tremendously because all the new polls are coming out showing Clinton up by 5 or 6 or more. Meanwhile, the PredictWise site also has 70% chance of winning. Princeton Election Consortium, that Sam Wang site, has 83. He's doing polls only. And then Larry Sabato and Charlie Cook leaning Dem. And then there's something called Roth, which I don't even look at, which is a toss-up. I don't get that. But since I don't know them, I'll have to go explore that a little bit later. In any case, The markets that I follow, which is the PredictWise and Betfair and Iowa Electronics market, just to see what's going on, they all have Clinton about 70% chance of winning.
Okay.
That's about right. Now, 30 is non-negligible,
sure,
but chances are she's going to be the president.
Okay.
Now, here's an interesting piece from David Rothschild, just as a tweet. Clinton, 70% more likely to win presidency today and higher chance of winning than Obama was at this point in 08 or 12.
Oh. Well,
in
fact,
significantly higher. So remember, what happened with Obama is that things settled out, and then his numbers started to rise. So there's still time for Trump to go into the 20s from the high 30s, low 40s.
There's a long way to go. And there's still even a long way to go until people are supposedly traditionally tuning in.
Right, exactly. But, it's after the conventions is when people start to do it. True that after September is when, after Labor Day, people really start honing in. But some of this is going to be locked in, and if he's trailing, he's just going to have a hard time making up differences. In other words, an 8-point lead in April is easy to overcome. Mm-hmm. And a 4-point lead at the end of August is not easy to overcome.
Yes. You run out of time eventually.
Yeah, but also things tend to get fixed. Here's another new one. This is from July 29th. The new consumer survey contains a big hint that Clinton will win the election.
Oh.
Because they asked, who do you think will win? Remember, that's my favorite question. 58% of the household surveyed by the University of Michigan said they thought Hillary Clinton would emerge victorious relative to 37% for the real estate and reality TV mogul Trump. Very different picture to aggregations of voter intention. A report published by Ludwig Maximilians University research fellow Andreas Graef in 2014 found that asking voters who they think will win has proved a better crystal ball than asking them which candidates they thought themselves likely to support.
What about the octopus one?
The octopus one, I don't know. It's like a Puxatawny Phil. I don't know what to make of that.
A more reliable crystal ball. I thought we had this octopus that hit it on the head every time.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe somebody
I forgot what happened. Yeah, it's been sushified at some point.
Exactly, deep fried. Washington Examiner, a Byron York, and this is hardly a Dem-friendly author or Dem-friendly paper, has a piece here. Dem convention goers predict a Democratic win. GOP convention goers predict, wait for it, a Democratic win.
Well, all right. Not usually the case.
We've been to Netroots Nation, and you go to some of these other conferences, and they often have a while you're there, vote for what you think is going to happen kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so Microsoft set that up both in the Democratic and the Republican convention. And final prediction at the Democratic convention was Clinton 320, Trump 218. In terms of, you get to play with the big board and guess what your electoral votes are.
Yeah, something.
So, 332 and Trump 206. The majority of Democratic voters felt that Clinton was going to win. But Microsoft had the same screen at the Republican convention, and the aggregate score, the roughly 450 Republicans who filled out the map, was Clinton 285, Trump 253. So Republicans predicted Trump would lose as well.
Well, that's I'm glad they were able to do it. I guess Microsoft guys must have had their product key handy and could use the new Microsoft Windows 10, unlike me. But
all right. So anyway, that's the big picture in terms of where polling is and where predictions are. Clinton seems to be in not uncatchable, but fairly strong position, especially when you look at the non-polling stuff, the state of the campaigns, how much money you have to get out the vote, and all that sort of stuff. And if Trump thinks that he's going to use social media as somehow a substitute for traditional get-out-the-vote, micro-targeting, on-the-ground, knock-on-door stuff, because Clinton has set that up for a year and Trump doesn't have any money and hasn't done it yet, that baiting somebody with a tweet and not trusting them with nuclear weapons is really going to take a lot of the impetus out of that. Do you want to get serious for a bit?
All right.
Okay.
No.
So you got a choice here. We got a lot of interesting things. We have a look into the minds of Trump supporters from David Frum, why Trump supporters think he'll win. We have a couple of fascinating pieces on working class whites and racism, a dialogue between Chris Arnaud and James Surowiecki, which I've storified.
Ooh.
I have a piece on Jill Stein and vaccines and autism, if you're interested. I got a Jeff Goldberg piece here, The Hollow Men. Why didn't the most talented, most influential Republican politicians, Christie, Cotton, and Ryan, do more to stop Donald Trump? And then Ex Post Factoid has a really nice short piece here for Hillary Clinton, a siren song on the right, for Warastad Hout and Ramesh Ponnuru and all of the Republicans saying, Clinton blew it because that whole Democratic convention looked like a Republican convention. It sounded good. It had the Constitution. It had patriotism. It had American flags. Then she came out with a liberal agenda during her speech and blew it. She should have gone to the middle and really tried to attract more Republican voters. That's a short one, so let's just do that really quick. The bottom line is when you actually look at their complaints, it was on abortion and guns.
Oh, well, all right.
Right. So why isn't she trying to attract more Republicans by saying, listen, I'll promise to support a judge who is fair on these issues, which is to say agreeing with them. Mm-hmm. And Ex Post Factoid has a nice post up here. On abortion, crime, federal spending, and taxes, Clinton is leading and speaking for a Democratic Party moved well to the left. Nonetheless, there are good reasons why Clinton is not and arguably cannot run to the center for the general election as nominees in normal elections do. One, all other things being equal, Clinton does not need to win over more ideological conservatives than Obama did. Enough habitual Republican voters will likely be disturbed enough by Trump to stay home to put her ahead of Obama on that front. We don't expect Republicans to vote for Clinton. Only the prominent national security people will. And Obama, temperamental, moderate, and pragmatist though he is, was cast as radically liberal by conservative media. Number two, Trump has revealed an awful lot of Republican voters have no allegiance to core Republican economic policies like massive tax cuts and social spending cuts. Clinton's to his right on trade, more willing to acknowledge that fair trade deals have value. So that's an important point. These Republican elites arguing that Clinton should move to the center are arguing that she should move toward their policies that their own base has rejected. Fascinating concept there.
True.
Right? In this, let's go, if she would only endorse the Ryan budget. Well, your base has rejected the Ryan budget. What the heck is wrong with you people?
Yeah, I don't know. But I guess that's what they think. I don't know why you would think that qualifies as centrist, except for the fact
because
that they're
by definition, if they do it, it's centrist. I mean, I'm a centrist.
So. That's all.
I'm a moderate. I am the center of the country. Everybody is either to the left of me or to the right of me. Why can't you see that?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it happens to be true with me, but these guys are wrong.
I'm positive it's true now. Yeah. All right.
Number three, in this moment of ideological fluidity, well-articulated left-side populism might win more white working-class voters than centrism. And we'll get to that white working-class thing in a minute because I think that's the big story of this election and beyond the election. See Trump's siren song to Sanders supporters, in my view. This is ex post facto. Elizabeth Warren has a more compelling economic narrative than Sanders. It's this. Since the 80s, moneyed interests via the Republican Party have knocked out three pillars of post-war middle-class prosperity: union and employee leverage, tax fairness, and effective regulation. Hence, the 1% has grabbed all the growth. As I've suggested in prior posts, Clinton could reverse engineer this story to explain how she'll boost middle-class incomes and security with policies designed to increase workers' share of profits, invest new tax revenue to increase shared prosperity via investments in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and rein in banks and the shadow banking system. But also reduce greenhouse gas emissions, protect employee rights. Clinton name-checks a host of specific policies that fit this agenda, but to my ear doesn't explain how they all fit together. Number four, Clinton has a stronger imperative to shore up various parts of the Obama coalition than to pick up new voters. And that's true, given that Obama won. So, more problematic for Clinton than the black vote, more likely, is disaffection among Sanders supporters. Again, not taking anybody for granted. And that includes Latino voters. But disaffection among Sanders supporters, particularly young voters who came out in droves for Obama, I think in the CBS poll, or one of the polls I was reading this morning, Sanders voters for Clinton is now up to 83% of Sanders voters. Although I see Nina Turner, very active and outspoken Sanders supporter, is being courted by the Green Party for vice presidential candidate.
Yes. Of course, Bernie Sanders was also being recruited to simply replace Jill Green.
Well, he
entirely.
said no. She said, I'll consider.
Right. So where else can we go?
He endorsed her. She didn't.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind. Anyway,
okay.
Particularly young voters who came out in droves for Obama, her approval rating among voters aged 18 to 29 is just 31%, according to Gallup. To win them, I think a Warren-style economic story could be powerful. And then there's the minor matter of the merits. Warren is telling the truth. For 40 years, almost all the benefit of increased productivity and economic growth have gone to the wealthiest. Labor's share of corporate profits has shrunk. The percentage of Americans in the middle of the income distribution has shrunk. College, housing, and healthcare costs have far outpaced the official inflation rate. It is time to take back what was taken. I think that's a good post. It points out that this whole idea of Clinton moving to the middle is a construct by conservatives trying to get something out of this election that they're going to lose.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that's the only thing that explains why. Well, maybe Dave even doesn't explain why they still think they're the middle, but certainly we understood that to be the case anyway. Yeah, all right, well, it's a traditionalist sort of thing, and I guess they thought that even in a non-traditional election, it might garner some interest, but right. Not from the candidate.
So David Frum has put together, after interviews with Trump supporters, a distillation. These aren't specific quotes from people, but a distillation of what he's heard. And it rings true because I've heard variations of this. So, for example, you people in the Acela corridor aren't getting it again. You think Donald Trump is screwing up because he keeps saying things that you find offensive or off the wall, but he's not talking to you. You're not his audience. You never were, and you never will be. He's playing this game in a different way from anybody you've ever seen, and he's winning in a different way from anybody you've ever seen. Winning by being behind in the polls, I guess.
Yeah.
Donald is energizing his voters, people who are afraid of crime, worried that the mass immigration that's transforming the country and displacing them. We talk a lot about polls, but you ignore the polls that don't show what you expect to see.
Okay.
And then here's another one. Here's what's going to happen. This will just give you a flavor. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to run up vote totals like you've never seen in places you've never been. Not just cold country either. No, we don't have what you'd call a proper campaign. What do we need it for? Campaigns spend most of their money on TV ads that do nothing except entertain you on YouTube on your lunch hour and pay huge commissions to the consultants who make them. Right about that.
Yeah.
It's all a waste and a ripoff. Right about that. If our message is exciting, our voters will get to the polls on their own, and you have to admit our message is exciting.
You must admit that. If you don't, we will shoot you.
Okay? The Putin thing. You think you've really nailed Donald with the Putin thing. Get it through your head. Our people are done fighting wars for your new world order. We fought the Cold War to stop the communists from taking over America, not to protect Estonia. We went to Iraq because you said it was better to fight them over there than fight them over here. Then you invited them over here anyway. Then you said that we had to keep inviting them over here anyway, and if you wanted to win over there. And then we figured it out. You care a lot more about the inviting part than the winning part, so no more. Not unless we face a real threat and have a real president who'll do whatever it takes to win and whatever it takes. And there's another way you don't understand Donald. When you squawk, oh, it's so horrible, he'll waterboard prisoners, he won't ask our troops to risk their lives so as to protect terrorist mother-in-law. When you talk about that, what our people hear is that you're a lot clearer about what you won't do to protect the American people than what you will do.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Those are Trump voters.
Right.
Okay? So now, let me read you a couple of tweet storms from James Surowiecki and one from Chris Arnott. So this one is James Surowiecki on the assumptions behind the Democrats have abandoned the white working class. And consider the people that I was just reading made-up quotes that sort of summarize what they're actually thinking.
Yeah.
As white working class.
I will assume that.
For the moment. Okay. Truth is, working class includes a lot of people who aren't white, and the working class includes a lot of people who aren't men, but let's just skip that for the moment and go to this. So there's a piece in Real Clear Politics. Has Clinton written, I think it's by A.B. Stoddard, has Clinton written off working class white men? And Surowiecki says, I'm a broken record on this, but this piece exemplifies assumptions behind Dems have abandoned white working class argument. The piece focused on gender, not race, but thesis is the same. Dems are too focused on identity politics and out of touch with the heartland. Instead of appealing to white working class men, the argument goes, the convention's message was, we've pretty much given up on you. And that's kind of a variation of what Ross Stout had and Panora were saying, except they're doing it in terms of policy. But it's the same concept. You've abandoned us. We can't vote for you. So Surowiecki says this is a familiar argument. But when you start to look at what it's really saying, its absurdity and offensiveness becomes obvious. In what way, after all, did the Democratic Convention send the message to working people that the Dems had given up on them? Sanders delivered a blistering primetime speech hitting out against free trade, Wall Street, and inequality. Biden gave an anti-Trump speech that was really all about which party has working people's interests at heart. The party platform is as progressive on inequality, wages, and working conditions as any Dem platform in decades. And Hillary Clinton gave a speech that was far more progressive, at least rhetorically, than anything one would have expected a year ago, which, by the way, is true. Both she and Sanders called for major increases in infrastructure spending, which will boost employment and wages. One thing that the Dems should have done but didn't was do a better job of talking about unions, but obviously that's not something the GOP does either. And no one talks about the GOP writing off working-class white men.
That is true.
So how did the Dems supposedly write off white working-class men? Essentially by not catering to their perceived prejudices. If you boil it down, the argument is that giving real time to issues of race and gender is somehow an attack on working-class white men. But that is absurd. There's no conflict between supporting Black Lives Matter and supporting an increase in the minimum wage or stronger unions. There is no conflict between celebrating the first woman presidential nominee and pushing for better trade deals or highway spending. Paying attention to race and gender issues is not an attack on working-class white men. And if it's perceived as an attack, that's because whiteness and maleness and not class have come to define the white working class. And that, of course, is exactly what much of Trump's campaign is about.
Now we're talking.
I thought that was pretty good. Now, here's an even more in the weeds one, but I think important because it is really the whole crux of Trump support. There is a piece that Chris Arnaud wrote for The Guardian, and it's entitled, What Do Donald Trump Voters Really Want? What do they really crave?
Okay.
In fact, you can make the same argument about him. And the answer is RESPECT. It's respect. They want respect because they haven't just lost economically, but also socially, but it's dangerous territory, anger tainted with revenge and sometimes racism. So he looks at a suburb of Cleveland, Parma, Ohio, not one that I know, but as James Surowiecki in his tweet storm that you're about to hear does reference, it's a lot like Yonkers, New York, where I did grow up. Heavily segregated, deliberately so. I mean, in Yonkers, where blacks and public housing was, and where the rest of the city was somewhat isolated from each other. They couldn't build a wall, but what they did is when they put in the housing projects, they made sure the streets don't run into the other streets in a normal way.
Yes.
So that you couldn't travel easily, you had to go around.
Right. Sometimes they just put an elevated highway in between.
Something like that, but something to make sure that you simply couldn't just go from one area to the other.
Yes.
Anyway, so here's how it goes. Chris Arnaud argues white working classes turned into Trump in large part because they feel disrespected. The demise of unions and other working class institutions, he argues, have left white workers socially bereft, and Trump speaks to their anxieties. Looking at the Cleveland suburb of Parma, Arnaud says, if Trump voters are surging ahead into outright racism, it's the symptom of broader decline. There's one big problem with the argument, though. Parma was a bastion of racism and outright discrimination when unions were strong. Arnaud notes Parma is almost all white. What he doesn't say is it's almost all white because the city fought all attempts at integration. In 1970, there were 41 black people in Parma out of a population of 100,000. In 1973, the Department of Justice sued Parma for violating Fair Housing Act. Yonkers schools were discriminated and segregated too.
Yeah.
Parma fought the case for 7 years and did nothing to integrate. In 1980, there were still only 364 black people in the city. This was a result of deliberate action to keep black people out. A federal judge who finally ruled city had discriminated found that Parma had a reputation as Cleveland suburb that was most hostile to blacks. Elected officials had made overtly racist statements. Would-be black homebuyers were steered away. The city refused to accept any federal housing funds for fear it would require integration. In 1968, Parma City Council refused to pass a housing resolution saying only city welcomed all persons of goodwill. Parma was, in other words, much like the Yonkers depicted in David Simon's Show Me a Hero, only worse. White residents were firmly opposed to integration of any type, even when unions were strong and the economy was booming. It's frankly preposterous to depict white racism in Parma as if it's a response to changing economic conditions or social anomie. Racism has been incredibly powerful in Parma for the entirety of the post-war period. Now, you might say, as people in Parma did, it's easy for white elites to talk about integration when they live in lily-white worlds, except this isn't true in Cleveland. Shaker Heights, the ritzy suburb, made an explicit and rigorous commitment to integrate in the late 50s. And maintained that commitment in the decades that followed. Results were imperfect, but ended up with far more integrated community. It's absolutely true that the working class, white, black, Latino, etc., has gotten a raw deal from the U.S. economy since the 70s. It's also absolutely true that Trump, like Sanders, articulated working class hostility to trade in a way that other candidates didn't. But white working class racism is not a new phenomenon. It's not stronger than it was when unions were powerful. And the simple reality is that for progressives and for the Democratic Party, anti-racism isn't the secondary consideration of economic justice. Both are central to any truly progressive vision. So yeah, the Dems are less welcoming to some white working class voters than once were, but that's because the Democratic Party is more committed, even if imperfectly, to anti-racism than it once was. The Democrats should reach out to white working class more than they have, but that can only work if white workers stop being racist, period.
All right. Well, let's get to that, white workers.
Yeah, let's do it. Chris Arnaud talks about, some follow-up to that, and I don't know if we have time for the entire thing, but in fairness, he's got a 15, 16 tweet storm of his own. And he says, I will have a go at this. First, what I completely agree with is racism isn't at all new and won't be solved by unions. My piece compared an all-white neighborhood to all-black neighborhood to highlight that how we live is racist. We are a segregated country. It was an illustration that we still have structural racism. And he's written about that before. Further, what I intended to remind is that ebbs and flows in racism, like crime, exist within a social and economic context. Presently, that context is dominated by income inequality, something Parma and Central, the black neighborhood, both are suffering from. The inequality is also social and cultural. So rich neighborhoods dominate what is allowed and what isn't. In that environment, people are rightly upset, feeling left behind, and are lashing out partly by demanding respect. The demand for respect is something written a lot about in poor black neighborhoods. That demand for respect, driven by inequality, coupled with a country already segregated, is the perfect setting for racist politicians. It is a demand that, in my opinion, his opinion, would be tempered by the existence of unions. What I forcefully disagree with is preposterous to depict white racism in Parma as if it's a response to changing economic conditions. He makes the point that actually current economic conditions matter. The idea that racism is an unchanging binary quality is naive and contrary to how liberals ask us to think about other issues. That doesn't mean it's less destructive or dangerous, but to combat it and the politics it leads to, it needs to be seen as such. And my piece in James Surovicki's response to it ignores a lot of messy details about Parma. It's mostly Democratic, mostly middle class, voted for Obama in 2012, for example. But my piece would have been better if I included historical context, so I certainly agree with James on that. We'll try better next time.
Well, that is rather broad, isn't it?
Yeah, but, just a fascinating thing to think about in terms of when you're looking at the whole big picture of how does Trump appeal to those that he appeals to. You can do this in shorthand and leaves out a lot of nuance, still get to the meat of it. I mean, I, for example, think of the people I grew up with in Yonkers, who are mostly ethnic, Italian, Polish neighborhood with a few Jews and a couple of Irish, always getting into fights with each other, and very hostile to blacks when I was growing up. Not me, but the neighborhood that I lived in. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff has been going on for a long time, and I would expect that in poor economic times, things just get worse because you got to blame somebody. And Trump knows this; he builds on it. I think he probably feels it a lot himself, based on the fact that he used to not rent to blacks if he possibly could. And so I think that he unfortunately doesn't have any talent for governance, but he does have a talent for sussing out this kind of sentiment, building on it, and talking to folks who would be very receptive to his idea that you got to blame somebody else. That's what demagogues do. So with that background, I think that the whole voting picture makes a whole lot more sense. Now, the good news is I think he loses. We'll see what happens in Pennsylvania and Ohio, these working class bastions that he's trying to get. He's not getting New York. He's not getting New Jersey. In fact, his own campaign has admitted that Virginia's out of play because of Tim Kaine. Smart move. And North Carolina's on the table. But the Trump campaign is focusing on Florida, on Ohio, and on Pennsylvania. And they feel like they have to win them all or they lose.
And that's probably true. But, yeah, we'll see what we can do about preventing that. I guess the only objection I throw into all of this is a minor one, which is that I even feel like it's overestimating Trump to say that he's very talented in sussing these things out. This is baked into the cake with him.
It is, but you watch him at his rallies, not at set speeches, but at his rallies and how he plays off the crowd. He's good at that.
Yeah, I mean, he's having
like
a conversation with people he grew up, not nearly grew up around, but rented to, and and he's familiar with the code in which they speak when they think they're being watched, but they need to wink at each other about how much they dislike black people. So I guess he's got a talent for remembering how to do it. I don't know what else, but yeah, he's not discovering anything new or bringing people around to racism, I guess. So he's not a persuasive guy. He's one of those people that finds coded ways of talking about minorities that other people like to wink at. And
this whole PC thing and stuff that he's tapped into, it's working for him. Yeah. That's how he gets his 40%. So I'm going to have to cut it there, leave you some stuff to think about. But I will say, I just heard from Mark Murray that I asked him the question and he's answering me. The NBC Survey Monkey poll will be out tomorrow. But I do expect the YouGov Economist poll this afternoon, and I'm hoping that a CNN poll will be out later today as well. So I'm going to leave it at that. We'll see about bounces and bumps and miffs and mistakes and self-immolation, which is what Trump appears to be doing right now with the Khan family. And, of course, the post-Khan bump we won't see till the end of the week. With that, this is Greg Dworkin speaking to my friend David Waldman. It's great to be back. And we'll see what happens on the rest of the show since you don't know where you're going. And that's the fun part about the show. We'll see where all of this leads you and what synapses are fired and what connections you make and what you want to talk about. But thanks so much for listening, folks. Thanks to the Next Radio's folks for making it happen. These were fun conventions, but the Democratic one was better. We got a better candidate, and right now we're ahead in the polls, and we'll see what happens. Take care.
Great. Thanks very much, Greg. I appreciate you coming by. Good to have you back. We'll speak with you again tomorrow. Here's an interesting thing. Is this happening to everyone or just one person, or will you even be able to respond to this if it really is true? H.E. Cross, listening in, I guess, on the Netroots radio feed, says Netroots radio keeps recycling back to the start of the program. This happened just about 10 minutes ago. To poor H.E., I'm sorry, can I call you H? I'm sorry that's happening. I've never heard of that particular problem. You never know with this sort of system that we've rigged up here, whether that's happening to everybody or just you, or have you tried turning off the world and turning it back on again? We'll look into that one though, and of course, as always, the podcast will be available for you shortly. I think we've got it down to most days we can get these things done and podcasts up by around noon. So, I don't know. It's cold comfort if you're trying to listen along live. But again, it strikes me this is a wasted effort because poor HE as well. He's listening to the beginning of the show. Maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Okay. Well, I'll try and get you that message and we'll try and get you that podcast early on in the day today. We'll make that a priority. Okay, well, Kate Sherrill says she's listening on the Netroots radio site, and it's all good there. Fine on Stitcher, says Arliss Bunny. And note from Justice, let's just switch over there. I've been working fine on all players monitored here. So, somebody tell poor H.E. that it's all going to be okay. Here's even the tune-in check-in from Parlio. This is pretty good. Justice... if you ever run into this problem, I guess, and or if you ever move on to this portion of the program, H.E., Justice says dump the cookies and or restart the player, which is the equivalent of, shut it off and started up again. So thanks, everybody. That's good news. So TuneIn checks out okay. Stitcher checks out okay. Netroots Radio site checks out okay. It's one of those things. We have so many, it goes through so many different channels these days that any one of them could break down for any one of our bajillions of listeners. Oh, my. Let's see. More tweets coming in here over the... oh, no, these are texts over the phone. Okay, I didn't get a chance to turn off all the volume, and that reminds me I need to set an alarm for making sure that we wrap the show up at the proper time today. Lots of things going on here. Rebecca Romans also says, not happening here. Somebody send him a note. Would you? H.E. Cross. It's easy enough to do. So, plus he'll be happy to hear from fellow listeners. All right. So what else happened over the weekend that requires mention? Many things. And I am not all that organized on all of them, but let's see if we can't get to the more important of many that are out there. How about this one? The one I did not tuck away good stories on because there were so many of them. I'm just going to peruse the news, if you will, by heading over to Google News and reminding you that last week ended on a particularly high and very strong note on voting rights law. The kickoff to it all, North Carolina in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals getting, bashed over the head and everything short of slapping the cuffs on the new North Carolina state legislature there. Their voting restrictions, voter ID rules, and all sorts of things. The voting system that the Republican legislature put in place, top to bottom, pretty much rebuked. What the bottom line here is that when the Supreme Court very recently essentially stabbed the Voting Rights Act in the gut and destroyed the regime of preclearance by the DOJ. As some of you are probably already familiar with this. Others, it may be good background material to have. But basically, since the passage of the Voting Rights Act back in the 60s, the regime has been that whenever states that have had historical difficulties with, racism and discrimination in their voting, in their approaches to voting, whether that's voting eligibility, availability of polling places, gerrymandering of districts, whatever it's been, and those places historically are the old Confederacy, for the most part. Those states that are basically on that watch list, anytime they make changes that could affect the equality of access to the franchise, access to voting itself, access to proper representation in the form of the drawing of the boundaries of the districts, etc. The changes they propose can't go into effect before they are pre-cleared of any hint of the same sort of discrimination by the voting rights folks at the Department of Justice. And very recently, the Supreme Court basically came to the conclusion that, hey, come on, it's the happening 2010s plus, and nobody's really all that overtly racist anymore. Nobody would dare to do this sort of thing. This isn't something we need anymore. Highly controversial and definitely disputed by the liberals of the court, but not so much, just it's a blind guess, really, by the conservatives of the court, and it was decried almost immediately by activists as, it's an activist court thing to do, to say, racism is over. We're post-racial in this society. And I suppose you could argue that they were trying to take some cues from a very hopeful Obama campaign theme of the early years, but I don't think that was really what motivated them. They essentially just wanted to make it easier for Republicans to bake in a partisan advantage for themselves by using racist concepts to do it, but justifying them in different terms and pretending they were race neutral when really they weren't. Essentially, though, what ended up happening here is the moment the court said, the High Court, the Supreme Court said, we no longer need these kinds of controls in place, the very first thing that the North Carolina legislature, controlled by Republicans, did with this newfound freedom to not have to send all their plans for pre-clearance to the DOJ was reinstitute exactly the kind of institutional racism that the court said no longer existed and therefore no longer justified the existence of the pre-clearance regime. Whoops. They really, they just couldn't wait to get back to it. This is highly embarrassing for the Supreme Court, except that one of the chief architects of it is dead and won't be able to enjoy the aftermath. Anyway, let's go to a couple of the write-ups about it so that we can, let's see, what are some of our best bets on some. As a matter of fact, why don't I take a look? I don't have to scroll back a little bit. I should be looking for the Daily Kos coverage of it. By all rights, don't you think? I should be paying some attention to what we would have written. But of course, it's a lot easier to Google. That's a problem, isn't it? It's a lot easier to Google up somebody else's write-up of it and a lot faster than it is to scroll through or try and use the somewhat still hinky search function over at Daily Kos. Let's see if I can't see what I can scrounge up through the search function, just to try my very level best to give the opportunity to the Daily Kos writers first. Don't know if I can even. Let's see. Let's scroll back and yeah, you know what? It's not that easy. All right, here we go. Let's pull this one because I like the headline. Stephen Wolfe on the front page. In a huge win for voting rights, federal appeals court blocks North Carolina's voter suppression law. You have to scroll all the way back to Friday, which is not an easy thing to do on Daily Kos. You got to do this stuff ahead of time. All right, let's hear it. In an extraordinary ruling, a federal appeals court overturned a lower court ruling and granted a broad injunction against North Carolina Republicans' sweeping voter suppression law. Crucially, the appeals court found that the legislation which created a strict voter ID requirement, ended same-day registration, ended out-of-precinct voting. And remember, why would you have out-of-precinct voting? If you have any question marks, over your head about that one, you live in one district, work in another, you're not back in your home district during regular voting hours very often at all. And so if you could vote on your lunch hour, you would. If you could just check in somewhere else and say, in the computer age, in the internet age, can't you check me off back at home, even though I'm over here, but let me cast that ballot because it's the only way I can get it done during the voting hours that you've set. That's it, right? So, ending same-day registration, ending the out-of-precinct voting, also pre-registration. And here's the serious problem with all of this. All of this, quote, was, quote, passed with racially discriminatory intent. An extraordinary thing for the Republican legislature to have let be discovered. Really, it was pretty sloppy top to bottom. But you'll see how they did it and I guess why. Unlike recent rulings against new voter ID laws in Texas and Wisconsin, which only ameliorated the impact of those laws. This decision, though, in North Carolina, blocks the state's entire voter ID measure. The ruling is, as they said up top, an enormous victory for voting rights, and not just because voter ID will no longer be required at the polls. The finding of discriminatory intent is key because it could ultimately serve as future grounds for placing North Carolina back under the Department of Justice's pre-clearance regime for 10 years. That's how hard they stepped in it. They stepped in a pile of steaming crap that also had a rake spokes up, tines up underneath it. So you got to scrape your shoe off, plus you give yourself a black eye. Many states, mostly in the South, that had a history of racial discrimination once had to clear any changes to voting procedures with the Justice Department, and if they were found to restrict minority voting rights, they were disallowed. But after the Supreme Court gutted a key part of the Voting Rights Act in 2013, several states, like North Carolina, swiftly passed new voting restrictions that were no longer subject to the department's review. However, a separate provision of the VRA, Voting Rights Act, allows the courts to reimpose pre-clearance, which would present a major obstacle if North Carolina Republicans ever try to impose similar restrictions in the future, or at least in the next 10 years anyway. Republican legislators could appeal this ruling either to the entire Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, sitting en banc, as they say, or to the Supreme Court. However, judges appointed by Democratic presidents now dominate the Fourth Circuit. You're welcome. And with Supreme Court ideological split now still 4-4, thanks to Republican refusal to fill that last seat, well, gee whiz, looks like they're in trouble. A likely deadlock at the Supreme Court, of course, would leave the appeals court ruling in place, which I guess is the only reason anyone was ever entertaining the en banc review, because that's really the last chance they have to turn things around. But it ain't going to work, because the Fourth Circuit is now dominated by Democratic president's appointees. And you know how that goes, because the courts are so totally apolitical. Right, Armando? Anyway, in case you were wondering why Democratic presidents' nominees now dominate the Fourth Circuit, well, one, of course, they keep winning the presidency, and that will do things. And then, of course, two, Republicans can no longer simply sit on their hands and or filibuster appointments to the Fourth Circuit, because, well, you know what we did regarding that one. So, important. Big win. All around. Didn't see it coming? Well, no problem. We don't mind pausing to explain it to you now. Anyway, let's finish up with the article here. Still, North Carolina's restrictive voting law has been effectively blocked for the 2016 election. That's good, because that's this one, which could have enormous consequences given its status as a key swing state and home to one of 2016's most important elections for governor, and possibly a competitive Senate race as well. We are also exhorted, would be the word I'll choose for this one, to see election law scholar Rick Hassan's coverage for developing details. Maybe I should just hop over there, take Stephen's word for it, and see what there is to see over at Election Law Blog. Breaking news and analysis. Partially divided. Fourth Circuit strikes North Carolina's strict voting law, finds discriminatory intent. And we should take a look at this if they've got an explanation of exactly what it was that they found in terms of discriminatory intent. It really is rather amazing, although this is an extraordinarily detailed look at it. Let me now skip back over to my Google News search, because what I'm looking for is for somebody to give me an already formulated explanation, otherwise I'll just wing it, of exactly what North Carolina did that really disturbed the court and really made it clear that this was something that they just had to stand on its head no matter what. I'll take a look over here. Here we'll play to our audience on this one and go to alternate, and which is actually rerunning a David Ferguson piece from Raw Story that's got the kind of headline that'll make the story fun. Voting rights expert says, criminal, in scare quotes here, I guess, criminal North Carolina GOP tried to block black voters with almost surgical precision. Republicans in North Carolina targeted all the methods that African Americans had used successfully, to vote, to be heard, to exercise the franchise. And you can't have that. On Saturday's edition of MSNBC, MSNBC's The Reid Report, Joy Reid, right? Journalist and voting rights expert Ari Berman. Hey, Ari. That brings back memories, right? Of, when was that? We had a nice panel one time that was really something, I don't even know if we were talking about voting rights at the time. But it was this, I think probably one of our first discussions of the impact of ALEC at Netroots Nation. But it was a really interesting panel, and I'm trying to remember who else was on it. Darcy Berner was moderating it, and I was there, and Ari was there, and the fact that we got around to those voting restrictions, but also we were talking about the attacks state to state on teachers' unions and how those had happened one by one, and state after state after state, and it was, for most folks, I think at that point, a mystery. Why does this keep happening over and over again? Anyway, Ari, writing on this one and speaking on this one, he'll give us the explanation that will be familiar and powerful for all of us here. Okay, so what did Ari Berman do? He told host Joy Reid, of course, that North Carolina Republicans got caught trying to actively disenfranchise black voters in the state. That was obvious to those of us watching, even at the time. But it's good to hear him state it this way. On Friday, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals found that Republican state legislators deliberately and openly, this is the weird part about the whole thing, sought to block black voters from voting with this new law, which passed in 2013. Berman wrote in The Nation that North Carolina laws, quote, required strict voter ID to cast a ballot. That much we had heard. Cut a week of early voting. That was the really insidious part of all this, I think. And eliminated same-day voter registration, out-of-precinct voting, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. That's the pre-registration that was mentioned earlier. Today, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit invalidated these restrictions, which said it targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision in violation of the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment, he said. This is where it really becomes something. Yes, it targeted African Americans, but the fact that they actually left a trail behind of their intent to target them is what's so extraordinary here. They did so just a month after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, Berman told Reid on Saturday. That was also what made it really just, that won't make a difference legally, of course, but just morally, that's precisely what I was getting at earlier, that they just, right out of the gate, as soon as the Supreme Court said, man, we really don't need to protect against this kind of discrimination anymore, they said, because it doesn't exist. They said, not only does it exist, it's been, chomping at the bit for the chance to get out of the, to extend the metaphor, to get out of the gate here. We can't wait to discriminate again. We've been waiting so long for you to get rid of preclearance so that we can discriminate with ease. And, of course, as soon as they did get rid of it, they did discriminate. It just turns out that they couldn't do it with as much ease as they thought because the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals isn't the receptive venue it once was for them. So, just a month after the Supreme Court guts the Voting Rights Act, they said, great, fantastic, let's discriminate. Republicans in North Carolina targeted all the methods that African Americans had used successfully. In other words, basically what they did was, and Steve, even here, I don't have, maybe he writes it in The Nation in the longer piece. I would love for somebody to show me how to recount exactly what they did here, and maybe the Nation piece is where I've got to go with this one, because I'll hop over there. And again, if I'm not satisfied by this piece, I'll just have to tell you. But I'd really love for somebody to have already coherently put it together, and I know that they did because I saw it all over the place on Saturday on Twitter, and I don't really know why I don't have those pieces put aside, but they may have been just tweeting what was being said on the show. All right. Let's take a look at Ari Berman's July 29th entry in The Nation. On June 25th, 2013, the Supreme Court struck down the heart of the Voting Rights Act, ruling that states with the longest histories of voting discrimination no longer had to approve their voting changes with the federal government. By the way, just to tie it to longer arcs that have been discussed before on the show and by me in writing back in the days when I was writing down these blogs and publishing them over at Daily Kos and Congress Matters for that matter, and a few other places, I suppose, too. Plus the theme that Armando keeps coming back to, that these guys know what decision they want to make on the Supreme Court and want to lock it in place regardless of what the law says about things. They can, once you rise to the level of the Supreme Court, you can just make up your mind that the law says something entirely different, and if you've got 5 votes for it, that's what the law says, and it is always said, and there's nothing you can do about it. History be damned. But the manipulation of what was going on at the U.S. Department of Justice during the Bush years, it's amazing that this took until 2013 for them to nail down. I'm sure that they planned to do it earlier and would have had John McCain, I suppose, won in 2008 instead of Barack Obama, but they eventually found their way around to it at the Supreme Court, with the Bush's legacy having been left behind in John Roberts. But this was a big and active part of what the Bush administration was doing with their Department of Justice Voting Rights Division all along, populating it with the likes of Hans von Spakovsky and others whose agendas were quite obvious, and that's how they landed at the Voting Rights Division in the first place as political appointees of the Bush administration, looking to institutionalize their voting discrimination and racial discrimination in ways that utilized the state, the then current state of the law. That is, they couldn't get rid of the they couldn't get rid of the legal regime yet that required pre-clearance, but what they could do without having won that victory yet at the Supreme Court is simply put in place top Justice Department officials who would agree to simply pre-clear facially discriminatory plans by states subject to pre-clearance, and then use the assumption also written into the law that there really isn't much in the way of legal recourse against a decision to pre-clear a discriminatory plan. The pre-clearance gives it a stamp of approval that requires, if you're going to take legal action against a pre-cleared plan, you've got to clear an enormous evidentiary hurdle, because courts are instructed by the wording of the law to take pre-clearance as the signal that that there really has to be something extraordinary to overturn, and it made the burden of proof for people who knew from the ground that it was discriminatory, these plans were discriminatory on its face, and were frustrated in their purpose by deliberately placed and deliberately racist Department of Justice officials who knew that they could take advantage of the system by simply throwing all respect for the law and dictionary definitions of what discrimination meant out the window, and simply saying, yeah, to hell with it. It doesn't matter that it's facially discriminatory. I'm just going to say, for purposes of preclearance, that it's not, knowing that it will become impossible for the average voters in the states affected to come up with the kind of evidence they need to overturn it. Ironically, some of the kind of evidence you would need to overturn it was present in this case, which brings me back to my need to read the Ari Berman piece aloud to you. Okay? Just wanted to put that out there as background, though, because I think we're going to hit on some key moments in this description that will light the light bulbs for everybody here. Okay. So where were we? The Supreme Court strikes down the heart of the Voting Rights Act, ruling that states with the longest histories of voting discrimination no longer had to approve their voting changes with the federal government. So no more need for Hans van Spakovsky inside the DOJ. A month after that decision, North Carolina, where 40 counties were previously subject to that requirement, passed the country's most sweeping voter restrictions. The state required strict voter ID to cast a ballot, cut a week of early voting, right? Okay, all those things. Eliminating same-day voting, out-of-precinct voting, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. Today, the U.S. Court of Appeals, that would be Friday, for the Fourth Circuit, invalidated those restrictions, which said they targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision in a violation of the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment. It reversed a 485-page decision by the district court upholding the law. Down at the district court level, where you just need the one judge, you got problems. This is a huge victory for voting rights, the most significant in the country since Shelby County v. Holder, that will make it easier for hundreds of thousands of voters to cast a ballot this November. It comes just a week before the 51st anniversary of the Voting Rights Act on August 6th, coming up, and is especially welcome because there were widespread voting problems during North Carolina's presidential primary in March that offered a disturbing preview of what to expect in the general election. Students waited in 3-hour lines. Foreign-born U.S. citizens were asked to spell their names to poll workers for no reason in an apparent literacy test. And elderly voters born during Jim Crow were turned away from the polls. Most notably, the Fourth Circuit found that GOP legislators restricted the voting rights to intentionally target African American voters. Yes, we keep saying that, right? But now we're going to get down to the precision that they keep hinting at. North Carolina passed a series of reforms beginning in 2000 that benefited all voters, particularly black voters, wrote Judge Diana Motz, the Clinton appointee, in a unanimous opinion. And here a quote from the opinion. During the period in which North Carolina jurisdictions were covered by Section 5, that's the famous part about pre-clearance of the Voting Rights Act, African American electoral participation dramatically improved. Well, you can't have that, right? In particular, between 2000 and 2012, when the law provided for the voting mechanisms at issue here and did not require photo ID, African American voter registration swelled by 51.1%. And of course, as you know, African Americans disproportionately vote for the Democratic Party. Republicans in the state legislature did not want to have that. They didn't really want black people voting at all for any reason because they're different from white people, but the fact that they voted Democratic was particularly galling to them. And so there had to be something done about allowing more black people to vote. What a terrible thing it is for them to be able to find representation in government, because if they do, then we will lose and the other people will win, and that's bad. African American turnout similarly surged in addition to registration. The turnout surged from 41.9% in 2000 to 71.5% in 2008 and 68.5% in 2012. A little bounce backward there, I guess. It was very exciting in 2008. So as it turns out, if you allow them to vote, they will. Yee. Then, Berman continues, after these gains occurred and the Supreme Court gutted the VRA, North Carolina Republicans swiftly curtailed or eliminated every voting reform in the state that expanded political participation. Back to the opinion. After years of preclearance and expansion of voting access, by 2013, African American registration and turnout rates had finally reached near parity with white registration and turnout votes. That's a problem. They are almost equal. My goodness. African Americans were poised to act as a major electoral force, but on the day after the Supreme Court issued Shelby County v. Holder in 2013, eliminating preclearance obligations, the day after, even, it wasn't even a month, it was the day after, a leader of the party that newly dominated the legislature, Republicans, and the party that rarely enjoyed African American support, hint, hint, announced an intention to enact what he characterized as an omnibus election law. Before enacting that law, this is the key part, the legislature requested data, and that's always, you say it's always a good thing. You requested data. Oh, data-driven legislation. That's not a bad idea, unless, of course, you use the data this way. They requested data on the use by race, of a number of voting practices. Upon receipt of the race data, the General Assembly enacted legislation that restricted voting and registration in 5 different ways, all of which disproportionately affected African Americans. In other words, of course, the Republicans said, now that we're free of pre-clearance, I want you guys to go out there and research and give me the data. I want to know, with all of this resurgence in interest in voting, in actually exercising the franchise, I want you to tell me, how do African Americans prefer to get themselves registered, and how do they prefer to cast those ballots? What methods are they using most to make our chances, white Republican chances, worst for winning elections and seizing and holding power in perpetuity? And when they found out what those things were, early voting, same-day registration, out-of-district voting, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, they said, okay, along with our discriminatory voter ID laws, which everybody knows are discriminatory and why, and we've been talking about for many years, I want you to add these other 4 things. A package of 5 things designed intentionally to eliminate the channels through which African Americans most effectively exercise the franchise. And we'll simply say those things are gone. Now, without respect to race, we're getting rid of these things. We're certainly not going to write into the law because Negroes are using these things to displace white people, and Republicans in particular. We want to get rid of them. No, they'll simply say, we'll find justifications after the fact. Who cares what the justifications are? Just remember, don't say anything about it being about black people. But the only things we're going to eliminate here are the things which top the list, the things that are most effective in helping African Americans exercise the franchise. To simply say, here's what we want in government, those things are out. That's the surgical precision we're talking about. They actually studied it. I want you to tell me what gets African American people registered and voting, and we want to get rid of those things. So, my goodness, not a good thing to be caught with. Back to the decision here, the opinion. In response to claims that intentional racial discrimination animated its action, the state offered only meager justifications. Although the new provisions target African Americans with almost surgical precision, they constitute inapt remedies for the problems assertedly justifying them, and in fact impose cures for problems that did not exist. Thus, the asserted justifications cannot and do not conceal the state's true motivation. Again, in other words, they said, all right, if this isn't racist in intent, tell me, why do you want to get rid of early voting? Why do you want to get rid of out-of-district voting? Why get rid of pre-registration? Why get rid of any of these things that are so useful and that have been obviously increasing the opportunity for everyone in the state to vote? Remember, we're supposed to be all about that. So I'm curious, why would you get rid of all these things? And basically the state could only come up with, well, we want to eliminate voter fraud. Okay, but so how does pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds get rid of voter fraud? They could be fraudulently saying they're 16 or 17. What? What about out-of-district voting? Well, people could vote out-of-district and then go and back to their district and then vote again later. Well, has it ever happened? No. And aren't there safeguards in place to make sure that that doesn't happen? Yes. And what about same-day registration? Any evidence that people are registering in multiple districts or under multiple names? No. So what have you got for me in the way of justifying this thing? If it doesn't have anything to do with this request of, hey, tell me how some studies, I want you to study the voting channels and tell me what African Americans are using. If that isn't discriminatory, what else have you got? Look over there. Alien invasion. Goodrich blimp. Couldn't come up with anything. Faced with this record, the court says, we can only conclude, that's all there is left to us, that the North Carolina General Assembly enacted the challenged provisions of the law with discriminatory intent. The court's opinion is a striking rebuke, Berman says, to Chief Justice John Roberts' ruling that voting discrimination is largely a thing of the past. Yeah, it calls Shelby into question, says Allison Riggs of the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, which argued the case along with the Justice Department, Advancement Project, and the ACLU, also joining in that case. Justice Roberts says, we live in a post-racial society, and this is strong evidence we don't. North Carolina has been no stranger to voting discrimination in recent decades. The court found that the Department of Justice objected 50 times to discriminatory voting changes from 1980 to 2013, and private lawyers won 55 successful cases under the Voting Rights Act. The intentional discrimination undertaken by the North Carolina legislature could not be dismissed as mere partisanship. Now, remember, there's still that refuge. Well, it wasn't racial in nature. It was partisan in nature, but that's not covered by the Voting Rights Act in the same way as that it explicitly covers racial discrimination. We recognize, the court says, that elections have consequences. Someone said that once. But winning an election does not empower anyone in any party to engage in purposeful racial discrimination. When a legislature dominated by one party has dismantled barriers to African American access to the franchise, even if done to gain votes, politics as usual does not allow a legislature dominated by the other party to re-erect those barriers. I mean, that's I guess one of the biggest points still left out of this thing, and one of the things that Republicans, I think, and just intentionally refuse to understand, although it may be difficult for them. Well, if it's legal for you guys, for Democrats to come into the legislature and change things so that it's easier for African Americans to vote, then if elections have consequences, why isn't it perfectly legal for Republicans, when they win the legislature, to come back in and make it more difficult for anyone who happens to be, disproportionately dependent on out-of-district voting, pre-registration, same-day registration, and early voting? Why can't we simply reverse those things? We won. Well, it's because the thing at stake is access to the franchise as a free citizen. That's actually one of those basic concepts that it's not, you can't say, well, both sides have their opinion about access to the franchise. Well, no, only one opinion about access to the franchise is permissible under the American system of constitutional law and justice. As much access to it as is feasible without excessive and provable risk of fraud. Ideally, it's still the case, I think. It's still the case, ideally, that an American thing to want is, let's say, if you could magically eliminate all fraud, right? No matter what happens, as much as any sneakiness anybody tries in voting fraud, if we could just eliminate it magically, what would be the argument against 100% access to the franchise? Democrats obviously say there would be none. You couldn't come up with one. It's impossible. It's impossible to be American and conceive of one. But leave it to the Republicans, who then say, well, what if you were black? That would be a bad thing, right? No, you're not allowed to say that. You can't, and it's not true, and you're not allowed to say it. In addition to being against the rules, it's obviously racist and disgusting. You can't do that. No. Well, you could if you won the election, or if you had 5 justices on the Supreme Court. Well, I mean, the fact that you can say it is true, but no, you can't do that. That's not American. It's not just. It's not fair. Why aren't you embarrassed by that? Well, elections have consequences. So, message in here for anybody who's still holding out, and there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. One party says, in America, we want everyone to have a voice in their representation in government. It's one of those taxation without representation things. It's an equality thing. It's an equal justice under law thing. It's kind of it's pretty much at the heart of America. Another party says, well, isn't there some way that we could make sure that the Negroes can't do it? and although I guess you could argue, and there are certainly people who do and who make sense in doing it, well, that's kind of at the heart of the Constitution too. We did try our best to eliminate that from everybody's modes of thinking and purge it from the Constitution. We were successful in doing that, but okay, so there are some people who are 150 to 200 years late in coming around to these things. Let's be patient. There's one party that simply says things are better if yucky people, particularly poor ones, and who really cares what the poor people think, because they're unsuccessful, and the prosperity gospel says that people who have success are the ones who ought to run things for everybody. Couldn't we just have that be the basis of our governance? And, the answer is no. Everybody gets a say. Everybody gets a vote. One man, one vote, yes, but you got to let them have that vote. All right. So that's the big difference here, and that's, I guess, that's really the key passage. It's not the one that everybody's focusing on so much, but I'm glad Ari put it out there. It's not the same thing. It's not politics as usual. We're not criminalizing politics if we say, no, the party that makes it a matter of policy to say we want fewer people to vote generally, and in particular, you black people are the ones we mean, don't vote. We don't want that happening. That's not two sides of the same coin, and it should never be mistaken for such. One is fundamentally American and one is fundamentally anti-American, and you shouldn't forget it. So thanks, Court. Thanks, King. We'll take it. Anyway, when it came to early voting, Berman continues, North Carolina admitted that eliminating voting on a Sunday before the election, because counties with Sunday voting in 2014 were disproportionately black and disproportionately Democratic. The court called this as close to a smoking gun as we are likely to see in modern times. The state's very justification for a challenge statute hinges explicitly on race. Specifically, it's concerned that African Americans who had overwhelmingly voted for Democrats had too much access to the franchise. What in the world is that concept? Is there any such thing? What is too much access to the franchise? And the answer isn't, you might think, voting twice, that would be too much access to the franchise. No, that's just voter fraud. Too much access to the franchise, too much opportunity to have a say in self-governance. I guess remember that. Maybe there are foreign listeners for whom that doesn't really ring a bell, but I don't think so. Because we all live in, I think, Western democracies. You might be living and working in somewhere else that isn't a Western democracy, but if you're listening to the show, you likely grew up somewhere that you were in a Western democracy. So I can't imagine that it's a foreign concept to anybody at this point, except, I suppose, Southern Republicans. But in a self-governing society, there's no such thing as too much access to the franchise. It just doesn't work like that. You can raise questions about fraud, yes, because there's no right to fraud, obviously. But if you're, I guess, as they put it up here, and as voting rights activists have said for a long time, if you're solving or attempting to say that you're solving a problem that doesn't even exist, you're going to have a pretty serious problem justifying it in a real court. And I guess we should remind ourselves we don't actually have real courts everywhere to actually analyze these things. But thankfully, the Fourth Circuit at this point works pretty much as intended. The court said, Berman continues, the state could only restrict voting rights if it had a good reason for doing so, which it did not. It questioned, for example, whether the voter ID law was really meant to stop voter fraud, since the measure required ID for in-person voting, used more by Democrats and African Americans, but not for absentee ballots, used more by Republicans and whites, even though that's where fraud is far more common. The court speaking here, the photo ID requirement, which applies only to in-person voting and not to absentee voting, because you can't show your ID to your paper, right, is too narrow to combat fraud. On the one hand, the state has failed to identify even a single individual who's ever been charged with committing in-person voter fraud in North Carolina. On the other, The General Assembly did have evidence, of alleged cases of mail-in absentee voter fraud. Notably, the legislature also had evidence that absentee voting was not disproportionately used by African Americans. Indeed, whites disproportionately used absentee voting. The General Assembly then exempted absentee voting from the photo ID requirement. Oh, that's weird. Although, I don't really know how you have a photo ID requirement for absentee voting, but oh well, that's just one of those structural difficulties we'll have to deal with, I guess. But yeah, when you're asked that, you can pass that law. There's certainly no problem about that. It's when you get in front of an actual judge, an impartial judge, who says, let me ask you, what's the point of voter ID laws for in-person voting if you're not going to have it for absentee voting? Well, that's just structurally one of the problems of absentee voting. There's nobody to show your ID to. Yeah, but isn't it true that you don't have that problem in person and you do have that problem in absentee? Yeah, but it's a problem we're willing to live with. Why? Because we don't know how to fix it? All right. Well, that may be true. But why do you insist on having it in place for a kind of voting that's never experienced this kind of fraud, even as you're kind of okay with not having it in place for the kind of voting that does have that fraud? Racism? Well, I agree with you, but that's a bad reason. Well, then I got nothing. North Carolina tried to soften its voter ID law before the federal trial, allowing those with strict government-issued ID to cast a ballot if they listed a reasonable exception. But the court said the law still discriminated against voters. Nothing in this record shows that the reasonable impediment exception ensures that the photo ID law no longer imposes any lingering burden on African American voters. This is significant because courts have recently ruled that voters in Wisconsin and Texas should be offered similar reasonable exceptions, which the court in North Carolina suggested will only partially ameliorate the burdens of such laws. In 2012, 10 major voting restrictions were blocked in court before the election, and a similar trend may be occurring in 2016. Remember, last presidential cycle. As Rick Hansen noted, this decision is the third voting rights win within 2 weeks. And there are still too many barriers in too many states, but it's a good sign that courts are starting to call out these laws for what they really are. And no one's done it more clearly than the court in North Carolina. So I wanted to at least make sure that that was on the record and discussed for everyone here. It really was a rather remarkable thing. And it's also remarkable that it took this long to get around to finding a court to actually say it. But also should be, like I said, contextualized by being held up alongside the record of the last Republican administration to occupy the White House and how they did it without a judicial decision, without pre-Shelby County, before they were able to find 5 votes to patch together to say no more pre-clearance necessary. They simply said, all right, we're stuck with pre-clearance, but that doesn't mean we can't make a joke out of pre-clearance. So another thing to remember, the last time the Republicans controlled the White House, they just did things that way. The next time Republicans control the White House, they will just do things that way. If pre-clearance is back on the table, they'll simply rubber stamp whatever North Carolina sends them and thereby frustrate the purpose of the Fourth Circuit and perhaps ultimately the Supreme Court, who will, are willing finally to sit down and say, yeah, but you don't have a reason for any of this stuff except discrimination. This can't be acceptable. The next Republican administration, in case you don't care or in case you think there's no dime's worth of difference between the two parties, the next Republican administration will do exactly what the Bush administration successfully did. They didn't even need Shelby County in order to do the same thing. So, important to remember in terms of what Armando has told you about the political nature of the court. I mean, for what reason would John Roberts feel comfortable in saying this? If he's so easily and so quickly proven wrong, for the Chief Justice of the United States to make such a broad assertion, I mean, is it simply, golly, I was wrong? I'm just surprised at how quickly and how thoroughly the same states that I just freed from this burden were eager to prove me wrong. Why did they want to do that? Why wouldn't they want to ease into things? Why couldn't they take the hint from me? I don't know. Maybe you were just entirely wrong, and so far wrong and so far out of step with what's really happening in the world that, well, there are a couple of conclusions, I guess, that could be drawn. One is that John Roberts is just completely out of touch with everything, and golly, he truly believed that we were in a post-racial society. Or, the other explanation is, he didn't care one way or the other whether we were in a post-racial society or not. He simply wanted X outcome because it would be better for Republicans. And he found 4 other justices who were willing to say exactly the same thing, despite the fact that just as it was obvious that facially discriminatory plans were being sent to Hans von Spakovsky and rubber-stamped, but it doesn't matter because the system affords us the ability to do that. Similarly, they wanted a certain outcome from the Supreme Court. It didn't matter that history and, in fact, modern social dynamics, forget history, what was actually happening in the country, made it quite obvious that this was not going to work out, that it was going to be exploited. How do I know it's going to be exploited? Because you were just exploiting it 4 years ago when you didn't have this legal opportunity to do it. You just simply rubber-stamped facially discriminatory cases in the DOJ Voting Rights Division and did it that way. Yeah, well, it is a different story when 5 justices say it. You are up against it once that happens. But thankfully, there are actually ways of pushing back against that from below, believe it or not, especially if you've got a 4-4 court that's about to possibly, if we ever get around to it, become a 5-4 liberal court. Wouldn't that be nice? Anyway, just a good reminder that filibuster breaking activism works and has real consequences, that rooting out the improper, illegal, and discriminatory use of federal appointees in the Department of Justice matters, and it matters when you point it out, as Josh Marshall did, and had to suffer some initial derision for it when he was talking about it in the U.S. Attorney's Division rather than in the Voting Rights Division. But we never really did get around to sorting that whole Voting Rights Division, what would you call it? Shenanigans out, really. And, of course, there's no punishment for doing anything like that either. We have no precedent for rooting those guys out. And in fact, the only person proposing the ability to root out the sort of partisan moles being placed at the highest levels in government where they can pull this kind of shenanigans off is, at the moment, Chris Christie on behalf of Donald Trump, who instead wants to root out all of the Democrats who have been placed in government because they're doing, for instance, in the Voting Rights Division, too much to allow the exercise of the franchise to, certain kinds of citizens of the United States. Anyway, it just, I guess, highlights just how insidious the Republicans were in doing that. And I guess I'll also throw in there, in case this is a missing piece of the puzzle for all of you. I mean, you might wonder, well, how is it that you can say with such certainty that people like Van Spakovsky were simply rubber stamping facially discriminatory plans? I mean, maybe they truly thought that they were not discriminatory. Just remember that the record of the time reflects very clearly that the career civil servants at the second highest level inside of the Voting Rights Division. People who are nonpartisan employees, who are protected by the civil service system, and who are the longest, at the time they certainly were, the longest serving staff inside the Voting Rights Division, the professional staff. In each case where Van Spakovsky and others overruled them. What was the other name of the guy? The Brad, I can't remember his name now. It escapes my mind, which is too bad, because he deserves to be called out for it. And we'll Google it and figure it out. But anyway, what the career civil servants in every single one of those cases, having studied those plans and prepared recommendations for the top staff who are political appointees, the very top people, are placed there by the president, in this case George W. Bush, or Dick Cheney, as the case may be. They, in each one of these cases, said, no, these are obviously discriminatory. It doesn't even take more than 10 minutes of reading through the plan to see the discrimination on its face. I absolutely, positively, and without hesitation recommend denying pre-clearance from the DOJ for these plans. That was in Texas. I'm sure there probably was one at the time from North Carolina, though it doesn't come immediately to mind. And those recommendations were, in each case, swept under the rug and reversed. And the political appointees at the top of the Voting Rights Division simply said, despite the fact that my professional staff says these things are facially discriminatory, I find, curiously and inexplicably, that they are not. And when the people back home said, that's bull, we're going to sue, they said, go ahead and do it, because you face an almost insurmountable evidentiary, but you are going to need to find a smoking gun memo somewhere that says, get me a voting system that discriminates against African Americans, stat, because I can't stand them and I don't want them to be able to vote. Maybe it needs to say because they're Democrats. Maybe it doesn't. Just needs to say, the worst kind. There's, I don't care how they vote. I would just not want any African Americans having a voice in their government. That would disturb me greatly. Get me a plan that does that. If you can come up with that memo, then maybe what Hans Van Spakovsky has to say about the subject doesn't really matter. And you might be able, maybe, if you get a decent court that doesn't care about the outcome, but rather about the law, then you might be in luck. You might actually win that case. But if you don't, and you happen to get a district judge, let's say, who's something like the district judge they got in North Carolina, with this very case, he says, that doesn't really matter. That's not a guy that, that's not a decision we have a problem with. Only on appeal in the Fourth Circuit did they actually get around to finding judges that say, no, this is actually quite obvious and quite problematic, and we cannot let it stand. Okay. Well, in my talking / Googling at the same time, I'm unable to turn up the name of the guy. It was started with, I think it's funny. What occurs to me is that the guy's initials was BS, right? Was it Brad something? And dude, it's so close. It's on the tip of my tongue. But I'll get it for you tomorrow, because I want to do one thing before we close things out here for the day, and that is to acknowledge a couple of tweets that we got from good friend of the show and longtime listener Sponson, who, similar to the way he wanted the record set straight regarding, I have to say it because I'm not bringing it up again, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, the Nevada State Convention and the chairs, which didn't get thrown. Remember those? But that was reported that they did get thrown, but then everybody reminds us it didn't get thrown, and we have to go out and say, again, please, everyone, if you have a memory of the event and it's associated with a chair being thrown, that's false. Don't think of it that way. Same thing, same concept here. We have to put on the record that on Friday, perhaps Thursday, when Armando and I were discussing the goings-on Thursday, and in particular the Khan speech to the convention on Thursday, I said that I thought I was hearing protest from presumably Sanders delegates because those were the people who were doing the protest, but I don't know. They didn't yell out, I am a Sanders delegate and I protest on behalf of... It wasn't like that. Obviously, it wasn't identifiable. That I thought I heard protest toward the beginning of the Kahn speech. I definitely heard it during the Allen speech, and I think I probably might have joined them on the Allen speech, even though I'm not universally joined by Democrats in having that feeling. It was very clear during the Allen speech, and it was very clear during other speeches, but it was not that clear. In fact, it's not at all clear during the Kahn speech, and that would be very surprising if it were clear during the Kahn speech, because in the aftermath, we all see exactly what the Kahn speech was all about. Here's what I saw, or rather heard, and I did watch it live, one of the few parts of the convention that I did watch live, in the very beginning of the Kahn speech, before it was entirely clear what we were really getting out of the Kahn speech and who they really were. There was an introductory video, and that should have explained things, and it did on TV, because you're able to hear this. On the floor, you don't really get to hear that stuff all that well. And I think what happened was there was a reflexive reaction from particularly the most virulently anti-war delegates there, no matter who they were there to represent. That when you bring on someone like the parents, even a Gold Star parents who had lost a son to the war, at the very least, they had something to say about their displeasure or disinterest anyway in glorifying warfare and even the sacrifice of a Gold Star family. But I don't think that they, even on Friday, I don't think that they had anything in for the Kahns here in the same way that they did for Allen. Allen brought it on himself. The Kahn family, I think, at most there might have been just sort of let's have a no more war chance in support of the Kahn family. If there were no more wars, there would be no more Kahn families there, speaking about the fact that they had lost children in those wars. That's true. And I think that they probably even at the beginning, thought that they offered their protest in support. I think they very quickly found out that this was inappropriate, and it was even, this was one of the few spots during which that kind of protest could be found to be embarrassing by those protesting. But on the other hand, Sponson points out, if you listen to the video, you can't make out any sort of protest chant at any point, and certainly can't make out the content of it. What I'm pointing at, and I think what gave me the impression was that I heard a bunch of, a couple of USA chants spontaneously sprout up in places that really didn't have any explanation for their being there. You can craft one, but I don't know if it's worth the time. It's something we probably ought to drop. What we can say at a minimum is, no, you can't hear with clear specificity any protest, and we have to put that on the record, and you can't hear anybody saying certainly no booze or even no more war. It's just circumstantial evidence that USA chant just happens throughout the rest of the convention to rise up in response to and covering up other kinds of protests that other delegates, rightly or wrongly, found inappropriate. That's what I heard, and that's what gave me that impression. So I wanted to at least put that on the record, and I think we can drop it at this point, because certainly anybody who had any protest of the Kahn speech on the floor probably now regrets it, and I'm willing to let them regret it and leave it at that. After the announcement, I'll see what I can squeeze in about what's coming up next.
Daily Kos Radio on NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Important stuff coming up on the after show with Wink and Justice. After this, here's the news from a Georgia town that is sending its police to black residents' homes to challenge their voting rights. And as more and more law enforcement and health professionals carry a common opioid antidote for addiction to prescription opioids, Big Pharma is increasing the prices. All that coming up next.